chapter meeting. This talk will be recorded, so you'll be able to see it on the Native Plant Society's YouTube site. I'm Elaine Silverstein. I'm one of the co-leaders of the Bergen Passaic chapter. Also here in one of the little vignettes at the side of your screen is Vicki Katzman, second co-leader, and Tom Bender's not here tonight. But I just have a few announcements before the talk, which is going to be, I think, extremely interesting. Just wanted to let you know that our February program is on Wednesday, February 9th, and it is about interactions between fungi and plants, which is, it's actually a lot more interesting than it sounds, because there's a great deal of new science about this, and it'll be an extremely good talk by an extremely good speaker named Steve Kutos. I would suggest that you look into all the webinars that are being hosted on the Native Plant Society website, because there are lots of them and they're all going to be very, very good. So please just sort of keep aware of what's going on in that website. The spring conference will be coming up soon on Saturday, March. I have the wrong date in front of me, but it's Saturday, March 5th, with a lineup of 4 excellent speakers, including Doug Tallamy. He will be the speaker first thing in the morning of that day. And if you've attended our virtual conferences in the past, you know that we do all kinds of fun stuff. We're going to pick plants of the year. We're going to elect a new board. So please come to that. And related to that, please join the Native Plant Society. As most of you know, you don't join the chapter, you join the state organization. It's just $20 for the year, and that supports all of the things that the Native Plant Society does. I wanted to mention to those of you who are in Bergen County, I would imagine we have some people from farther afield with us tonight, and we're very glad to know that. But in Bergen County, Bergen Audubon is doing their annual Eagle celebration this weekend. And it will be outdoors and live. And if you go, somehow they always manage to have the eagles fly by. So look at the Bergen Audubon website, and there's great information there. Last but not least, one thing we've been asking you for in our e-blast is if you can think of any, for the Bergen Passaic people who live up here, if you can think of any good sites for meetings. We would like to have more meetings out of doors. The September and October meetings that we held on Sundays out of doors were very successful. Lots of people came, we had a great time. We did one jointly with, I'm sorry about the weird background sounds, that's my computer, and I will mute myself as soon as I'm done with this. So somebody's commenting on those sounds, and yes, they are weird. Please, if you can think of any of great places where we could meet outdoors, as we did for the butterfly garden that Bergen Audubon maintains. We also met in my backyard. Please just let us know. That's the Bergen Passaic at npsnj.org email address. One last thing, put your questions in the chat, and Becky will answer your questions at the end of the program. So just type them into the chat. And with no further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Becky LeBoy, who is going to speak tonight about unique plants and wildflowers of the Pine Barrens region. Becky is the full-time education outreach specialist with the Ocean County Soil Conservation District, where her job is to develop educational programs for many different groups and many different levels. She's also an adjunct professor at Keene University, and she instructs the Barnegat Bay Volunteer Master Naturalist course. She has lots and lots of experience as a teacher and as a leader of nature walks and all kinds of things like that. And she's an avid birder. And it's my great pleasure. And she's a great speaker. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce Becky. And thank you for coming tonight, Becky.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Thank you for the introduction. And thank you so much to the Bergen Passaic chapter of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. I'm so excited to be here this evening and present my program, Unique Plants and Wildflowers of Barrens and Bogs. And I'm excited to showcase some of my favorite native plants and hopefully inspire you to explore the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. It's a really special place. In fact, it's New Jersey's International Biosphere Reserve. So once again, my name is Becky LeBoy, and I'm the Education Outreach Specialist with Ocean County Soil Conservation District. And on behalf of the district, I'm excited to present this program for you tonight. So let's get started. So before I begin showcasing all the beautiful wildflowers of barrens and bogs, I want to offer a quick review of the reproductive parts of a plant and their nomenclature so that you'll be familiar with these terms when I reference them throughout the program. Flowers are an essential organ in sexually reproducing plants. Perfect flowers house both the male and the female reproductive parts. The female part of the flower is called the pistil. The pistil consists of the stigma, style, and ovary. The ovary houses the ovule that eventually may become a seed if fertilization is successful. The style is an appendage that typically grows outward from the ovary, terminating in sticky tissue called the stigma. And the sticky stigma is somewhat of a platform for pollen grains that are blown by the wind or possibly delivered by pollinators. And the pollen grains are housed by the anthers, which are held high by the filament. The anther and filament together are called the stamen, which is the male part of the flower. Imperfect flowers that only have male or only have female parts are indeed called imperfect flowers, as opposed to the perfect flowers that have both parts. Male flowers are termed staminate and female flowers are termed pistillate. And below the reproductive parts is the receptacle, which is the thickened part of the flower stem, provides a base for the reproductive organs. And the stem of a flower is called a peduncle. And the sepal looks much like a leaf or a petal, and sepals are typically green. They protect the flower bud, or they provide support for the flower petals once open. In some flowers, the sepals may be a color other than green, and they may appear like attractive petals. Some sepals may be thorny or prickly to protect the fruit, and all sepals together are called the calyx. The New Jersey Pine Barrens is a really unique environment containing a mixture of diverse and contrasting habitats. Dry, sandy, nutrient-poor soils define much of the Pine Barrens landscape. And pockets of saturated anaerobic substrates pose different challenges to the growth and survival of plants. Anaerobic means without oxygen, the water is actually taking up the space in the soil that would otherwise be occupied by air. Tea-colored freshwater streams and creeks follow the relief of the land, flowing down gentle slopes towards the river, towards the bay, and towards the ocean. And along the way, these water bodies create and nurture hardwood swamps and vast stands of Atlantic white cedar. These and many other habitats in the Pine Barrens support an array of uniquely beautiful native flowers, shrubs, trees, vines, and other plant types that thrive in these challenging yet magnificent conditions. This presentation follows the structure laid out in Howard Boyd's book called Wildflowers of the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. And this is an amazing resource with lovely photos and concise descriptions. And I highly recommend it if you wish to explore plants of the Pine Barrens. As Howard Boyd's book does, I will introduce you to some of my favorite plants throughout the calendar year, according to the month in which they offer showy interest, such as bloom time or ripe fruit or other unique botanical features. I'll share with you some photos I've taken over the years throughout the seasons, and I'll linger on some plants, providing interesting facts, and on other plants, I'll simply showcase its beauty. And we'll begin with the month of March, when some of our earliest plants break dormancy, and working through August, the end of the summer season. One of our earliest blooming native plants is also one of our most rare, Conrad's broom crowberry. It's an endangered species in New Jersey. It grows in open sandy areas as pictured here in Warren Grove. And this location, which is just off Route 539, offers public access to some of the Pine Barrens' most rare plants, as well as its most ubiquitous plants, such as the pitch pine, creating the backdrop of this landscape. Conrad's broom crowberry is a low-growing woody subshrub, which spreads over dry sand in round clumping patches. Stems are covered in tiny needle-like evergreen leaves. In mid to late March, when it's still chilly out, through early April, tiny flowers bloom at the tip of each of last year's new growth. Broom crowberry is dioecious. Male and female flowers appear on separate plants. The green shrub in the back is the female plant, and the red shrub in the front is the male plant. Lacking petals, the flowers are very inconspicuous to the eye. The most easily observable parts of the flowers are the purplish red male anthers, and they house the pollen. A hand lens is very helpful to see them clearly. The pistillate flowers, the female flowers, retain a somewhat more greenish yellow hue, and pollination is anemicorous, meaning wind pollinated. The stigma of female flowers receives the wind-blown pollen during the pollination process. If a viable pollen grain successfully makes its way down the style to the ovary and fertilizes the ovule, the female flowers will bear fruit. New vegetative growth forms in the center of the fruit cluster. And here's a female plant with fruit. And here is a male plant with male flowers whose anthers are spent and the vegetation is turning a vibrant green color. And this male plant has vigorous vegetative growth. This is an amazingly hardy plant of the Pine Barrens. It provides an important eco-service to the soil, protecting the sugar sand from wind and from water erosion. Pixie or pixie moss is another hardy perennial that thrives in the sandy soil of the Pine Barrens. Tiny evergreen needle-like leaves grow thick along the trailing stems, creating a moss-like appearance. Tiny white flowers bloom in late March to early May. And once the petals drop, the pink sepals remain, offering another show of color. Tiny fruits begin to form, topped by the persisting style through which the pollen traveled to the ovary. A coating of pollen from another nearby species gives pixie moss a sparkling glow. Next, we will visit a wetlands habitat. Cedar Creek meanders through Double Trouble State Park in Ocean County. The reddish brown color of the water is a product of both the iron in the soils as well as the tannins in the surrounding cedar, pine, and oak vegetation. Tannins naturally occur in the roots, wood, bark, leaves, and fruit of many plants, particularly the oak. Tannins are complex chemical substances derived from phenolic acid, also called tannic acid, and naturally protect the oak from bacteria and fungi. The word tannin comes from the old German word tanna, meaning oak, and it refers to the use of wood tannins derived from oak trees that were used to convert animal hides into leather. Thriving in this tea-colored water is golden club, a perennial aquatic herb in the arum family. It grows in shallow waters in swamps, marshes, ponds, slow-moving streams, and bogs. It is the single living species in the genus Aurantium, which also contains several extinct species known only from fossils. And rooted in shallow mud, it produces interesting flowers fused together on a yellow-tipped spike or spadix atop a white scape in late March through May. Pollination is entomophilous, which means pollinated by insects. The flowers are thought to be pollinated by small flies, bees, and beetles, and a small fly was visiting this flower the day I took this photo. Water beads on top of the thick, bright green leaves, which offer contrast above the water's surface. When I explore the woods looking for wildflowers, I always welcome the sight of golden club each spring and have found it growing in several different locations, as well as several different habitats, including this sluggish stream that's meandering through the Atlantic white cedar forest. And at the edge of this large pond named Ore Pond, found in Double Trouble State Park, which is also surrounded by Atlantic white cedar. And although I've never tried it myself, I've read that golden club can be grown from seed in backyard ponds and water gardens and is best in full sun. In April, as the temperature rises, more and varied flowers begin to bloom. And leatherleaf, as its name implies, this wiry broadleaf semi-evergreen shrub has small leathery leaves and small white bell-shaped flowers that congregate only on one side of the branch tips, bloom in April and May. And once pollinated and fertilized, the ovaries begin to swell, as shown here, with the style persisting, much like it did on the pixie moss. It grows abundantly in swamps and bogs. And not to be confused with false teeth. Although the similar looking white bell-shaped flowers bloom around the same time as leatherleaf, false teeth, also called swamp dog hobble and swamp sweet bells, have leaves that are larger and more delicate, more papery-like, not leathery. And surely this is a favorite of all New Jersey native plant enthusiasts. This plant is a stunning beauty. It's swamp pink, and it is considered endangered in the state of New Jersey. It blooms in April to mid-May, but only for a short while. And the bright pink flowers are actually clusters of about 50 tiny, fragrant individual flowers all grouped together And each flower is considered perfect, meaning both male and female reproductive parts exist in each small flower. And the male pollen-bearing anthers are tipped blue, contrasting with the pink petals and sepals that are surrounding the female stigma. Absolutely gorgeous. And once the flowers die back, the glossy, lush, evergreen leaves remain vibrant throughout the growing season. Swamp pink is an obligate wetland plant and requires clean, undisturbed wetland habitat. To continue our enjoyment of this rare beauty, it's important that we protect its wetland habitat. So back to the dry pine barrens where Bearberry, Arctostaphylos uva ursi, can be found growing along the sandy pine woodland edges, blooming from mid or late April to mid-May. And Bearberry is a low-growing, trailing, woody subshrub with a thin reddish bark and numerous thick and shiny evergreen leaves. And plants can form large carpets that cover the dry sandy flats or cascade over sandy berms, such as this roadside. And small white flower buds develop in clusters in early April. And they are shaped like upside down urns or little bells, characteristic of many flowering plants in the heath family. Fertilized flowers develop into fruits throughout the summer. And by mid-August, the fruits have ripened to a bright red berry, many of which persist throughout the winter. Bearberries are presumably relished by bears, but I have no personal experience to confirm that. This plant is quite common in the Pine Plains, and it can be purchased for one's own backyard as a low-maintenance ground cover for sandy soil. And another one of my favorite plants is called sand myrtle. It blooms from mid or late April through May or June, and I encourage you to take a trip to the Pine Barrens during this time and enjoy this beauty. In late March, tiny flower buds begin to form on pink-colored new stems. And some plants retain last year's dried seed capsules, and held in juxtaposition to the new buds, they add interest to this plant's beauty. And the flowers bloom in dense clusters, showcasing 5 snow white petals and 10 stamens tipped with pink anthers. The flowers attract tiny beetles and small butterflies. This woody shrub is short in stature, multi-branched, and has tiny, leathery, evergreen leaves. It grows in abundance in moist, sandy soils, in pine oak woodlands, and you will encounter it along trails in dappled shade. By May, many showy plants have broken dormancy and are on display in your local woodlands free of charge. Pink Lady Slipper is a showy wildflower belonging to the orchid family. This plant grows anywhere from 6 to 15 inches tall and blooms generally between May and July. Its unique balloon-shaped or slipper-shaped flower is highly specialized, and it's really like no other existing in our local landscape. It is a bright magenta color with white and dark pink venation patterns throughout the petals, especially near that front opening of the pouch. Pink Lady Slipper requires bees, specifically bumblebees, and more specifically queen bumblebees for pollination because of their appropriate size and strength. Specialized Slipper orchids, like Pink Lady Slipper, are hypothesized to be pollinated by a single pollinator species or several species in just one genus. So I continue to read the scientific literature about this plant as I find it quite fascinating. So Pink Lady Slipper is a deceptive beauty. The flower's faint, sweet, fruity scent lures unsuspecting bees into the flower pouch through an opening in the front. The venation pattern directs the bee to this obscure location. Once inside, the bee finds no reward, as the Pink Lady Slipper does not produce nectar. Instead, the bees find themselves trapped, unable to leave the same way they arrived. Small hairs guide them towards the top of the flower, where they must push past the anthers, become covered in pollen, and must crawl over the stigma. If a bee bearing pollen visits another flower, the pollen will be deposited before picking up a fresh load on the way out. However, bees become wise to this no reward strategy, and so visitation is low. However, when fertilization does take place, a fruit forms and seed set is high. Generally, orchid seeds are very tiny and do not have food supplies inside them like most other kinds of seeds. So in order to germinate, Pink Lady Slipper, their seeds interact with a fungus in the soil from the genus called Rhizoctonia. And mycorrhizal threads of the fungus break open the seed and attach themselves to it. The fungus will pass on food and nutrients to the seed. And when the Lady Slipper plant is older and producing its own nutrients, the fungus will then extract nutrients from the orchid roots. So this mutually beneficial relationship between the orchid and the fungus is known as symbiosis. And it's typical of many orchid species. Pink Lady Slipper takes many years to grow from seed to mature plants, but they can live to be about 20 years or older. Collecting Pink Lady Slipper from the wild will undoubtedly result in failure, as the plant cannot survive without this intact fungal relationship in the soil. And with such a specialized life cycle, it's best to enjoy Pink Lady Slipper on a walk in your local woodlands. So yet another reason to preserve and protect our natural open spaces for everyone's enjoyment. Starflower is a small, delicate woodland plant in the primrose family, and it has a whorl of 5 to 9 lance-shaped leaves that taper to points at both ends, and it's shaped somewhat like a star. And from the center of the whorl grows 1 or 2 delicate star-shaped white flowers with between 5 and 9 pointed petals. The stamens are long and delicate with tiny golden anthers surrounding the female stigma in the center. And this plant is only about 4 to 6 inches tall and can be easily overlooked on the forest floor when taking a walk. And sometimes there may only be a single plant. Each plant has long, horizontally creeping roots that send up tiny stems. So sometimes you might come across several growing together. And if you're keeping an eye out on your walk, you are likely to see this plant growing in the leaf litter if you're walking in local pine oak woodlands in the month of May. And on a woodland walk last year at Ridge Road Wildlife Management Area in Brick Township in Ocean County, I came across the largest population of starflower I had ever seen growing in the woods right along the trail's edge There were starflower plants growing as far as my eye could see, and it was quite a sight. There literally must have been hundreds or thousands of them. All those tiny little green plants growing there in the leaf litter. So this yellow beauty blooms mid-May to early June. It's a multi-branching perennial subshrub with thin woody branches covered with tiny, bristly, needle-like leaves. And small, bright yellow flowers bloom on the tips of the branches, sometimes so densely as to almost conceal the foliage. It grows in the same habitat as the Conrad's broom crowberry and prefers the same conditions: full sun and dry sandy soil. And it adds some nice color to the wild landscape. Beech heather is similar to its pine barrens cousin, but beech heather is primarily a coastal dune species. So the tiny, bristly, needle-like leaves of beech heather are scale-like. Small, bright yellow flowers appear on somewhat shorter and hairy stalks, which are called tomentose stalks, giving it its name, Hudsonia tomentosa. And they also appear in mid-May to early June. If you have the opportunity to drive through Island Beach State Park, mid-May to early June, you'll see carpets, literally carpets of beech heather on both sides of the road traveling into the park. It's just absolutely beautiful. Turkey beard, this incredibly beautiful flower blooms mid-May to early July. A single flower cluster sits atop a tall, about 3 to 5 foot stalk. And the cluster is made up of many small, fragrant white flowers. The flower cluster itself can be about 3 inches tall and 3 inches round. It blooms from the bottom up, so the last flowers to bloom are at the very tip, while the ones below are spent and already turning brown. And if you encounter these in the wild, you will be practically eye to eye with these beautiful blooms. But it can be tricky to find these flowers when they're not blooming, as they grow in small colonies among other shrubs and plants and blending in pretty well. They do have a very thick basal clump of dry, wiry grass-like leaves. 1 foot or more in length, resembling green spaghetti. And the leaves persist throughout the year. So if you come across some strange clumps of grass seemingly out of place in the leaf litter in the woods, mark the spot on your map and return again in May or June to see if turkey beard is in bloom. So now to the bog to see the dragon's mouth. Arithusa bulbosa is the first of 3 orchids that I seek out each year in the local bogs of the Pinelands, although New Jersey has over 50 different species of native orchids. This one blooms mid or late May to late June. It has a single scape or stem that rises from an underground bulb and produces a single flower. The flower is a combination of sepals and petals, with the bottom petal or lip bending down with a beard of white, yellow, and purple colors. Another unique and favorite plant one can't help but view in awe is the pitcher plant. And this perennial grows in bogs, which are nutrient poor due to the naturally anaerobic conditions. So the pitcher plant has evolved carnivorous habits to supplement its dietary needs. And this is a a fun and interesting plant because it's usually the animals that eat the plants. But here we have plants eating the animals. But in the case of the pitcher plant and a few other New Jersey native carnivorous plants I'll introduce later, you'll see they're very clever at getting their nutrients. The pitcher plant has a basal rosette of leaves that do the dirty work of capturing insects as their main source of nitrogen. And the leaves are tubular, or what you might perceive as pitcher shaped. The colorful patterned area called the flared flap contains nectar glands, brightly colored veins, and fragrance that all attract insect prey. And each flap has 2 lateral rounded lobes. The inside of the flap is covered with downward pointing hairs, which are actually modified stomata, and they direct the insects into the pitcher and discourage their exit. That collar-like upper rim is called the peristome. And new research shows that the rim actually reflects ultraviolet light that some insects can see. And you can see that this pitcher is holding some rainwater. As the insects descend into the leaf, they slip and fall into the water. And enzymes secreted by the plant break down the insects, and the plant absorbs the nutrients, and in particular the nitrogen. And now pitcher plants don't need to eat insects in order to survive, as they do also photosynthesize. But the scientific literature states that plants that supplement their diet with the insects are healthier plants. A single flower emerges from the center of the basal leaves on a tall, slender scape in late May. And here it is a tightly closed bud. And as the bud begins to open, you can see the 5 sepals and 5 petals, which are both a magnificent dark red color. The central part of the flower is a green disc. It's called an umbrella, which is actually the style. And the style opens further, and underneath are several stamen. The pitcher plant is pollinated by native bumblebees and the pitcher plant fly. And this plant is beautiful from front to back. And personally, I never tire of looking at this unique flower. Its beauty radiates from every angle and in every season, even in the wintertime. And here are last year's flowers. I see a cat's face in that flower to the right. And this flower spent the winter wrapped around another flower called gold crest. To me, it looks like a crown and a scepter. And I can see what appear, I think, to be tiny seeds held by the dried basket-like umbrella of the pitcher plant. And sharing the bog with the pitcher plant is the pipewort. Pipeworts are tight, round clusters of tiny flowers at the tip of a naked stalk. Pipeworts are wetland herbs that can grow entirely in the water, like this group found in Warren Grove, or out of the water, but close to its edge. There are 3 species of pipeworts in the pine barrens, all growing in wet, marshy habitats. Flattened pipewort blooms in mid-May to late June. The other 2 species bloom in mid-July to early October. And the fun of taking pictures of these plants is looking at them later and seeing things that my eye missed at the site, such as the beautiful spider web knitting these plants together. June is my favorite month to visit bogs and wetlands in the pinelands. Lots of unique and beautiful plants are in bloom. Grass pink is the second of 3 bog orchids I always look for in my botanical travels into the wetlands of the pines each year. It blooms in early or mid-June to late July, and a flowering scape grows from an underground bulb. And on the scape, you can find a handful of individual flowers that bloom sequentially up the stem, starting at the bottom. The flower is made of both petals and sepals of the same pink color. The uppermost petal is bearded with fleshy hair-like structures and attractant for insects, such as this cute furry bee. The difference between this orchid and the other orchid, the Arithusa Bulbosa or dragon's mouth, is that the beard on grass pink is the uppermost petal, and dragon's mouth has a bearded lip on the bottom. Grass pink also has several flowers on its scape, whereas dragon mouth only has one. Rose Begonia is the third of our 3 bog orchids that I'm covering in tonight's program that I look for every year. And sometimes you can catch grass pink blooming at the same time and in the same place as Rose Begonia. Like dragon's mouth, Rose Begonia has a bearded bottom lip and is sometimes called snake mouth. This bottom lip is used as a landing platform by insects, although the flower is smaller than the other 2 orchid flowers, measuring only about 1 inch or 2 across. Like dragon's mouth, Rose Begonia has a single flower on each scape. And here it is blooming with other wildflowers in the bog. Isn't that beautiful? It's a perennial herb. Rose Begonia propagates through runners as well as seed. At the end of the season, the fruit capsule dries up and it breaks open. And inside are hundreds of tiny seeds that will fall into the water and await their turn in the bog. Bladderwort, with its beautiful yellow flowers, blooms alongside Rose Begonia in mid to late June into early August. Bladderworts are carnivorous herbs like the pitcher plant. However, some grow without roots in the ground. At the base of their stalk, you can see a radial structure of modified leaves, each divided into smaller hair-like segments containing air sacs or bladders that provide the plant with buoyancy. And each tiny bladder has a tiny bristle at the opening of the bladder, barely visible in this photo. And when the bristle is triggered by a microscopic organism in the water, the trap springs, and with lightning speed, water is drawn into the bladder like a vacuum along with the organism. Enzymes and bacteria then decay the animal, and the nutrients are absorbed by the plant. Horned bladderwort has a small, beautifully shaped yellow flower, easily identified by a protruding horn or spur, and it blooms mid or late June to early August. There are 14 bladderwort species found in New Jersey, 10 of which can be found in the pinelands, and 2 species have purple flowers, and 1 rare species has a white flower. And here's a lovely grouping of horned bladderworts in Webb's Mill Bog on Route 539, not far from the dry, sandy pine plains in Warren Grove. So the next plant I'm going to introduce to you is called Gold Crest. And this was the crown pictured with the scepter in a previous photo with a winter pitcher plant. And this is another favorite wildflower of the bog. It's a perennial herb with a tall stem topped by a cluster of flowers. And before they bloom, the flower buds are held tightly together in a ball covered with woolly hairs, and botanists call that woolliness tomentos. The buds unfurl into a stiff, multi-branched, white, hairy structure, tomentos structure, and one by one, the tiny bright yellow flowers bloom, and they look like beautiful little shining stars. The anthers at the tip of the stamen are a blazing orange, just so pretty. A characteristic species found only within the heart of the pine barrens, Gold Crest is sharing the bog here with horned Bladderwort and pitcher plants. So even after the stars dim, this plant plays an important ecological role in the bog, offering structure for other organisms to build homes. Its tiny seeds are shed, and as the seasons change, Gold Crest maintains its beauty in the quiet bog. Bog Asphadel is in the lily family. It's a 1.5 to 2 foot stalk that terminates in a dense cluster of small yellow flowers that bloom mid-June to late July. It is a threatened plant in New Jersey, although Webb's Mill Bog has a nice population of individuals that grow a distance away from the boardwalk that encircles the bog there. Although on occasion, 1 or 2 plants make their way to center stage where they mix with the rose begonia and the gold crest and the bladderwort. And although this plant showcases its flowers in the summer, it offers an encore in early fall when the fruit dries into an autumn orange. And a visit to the bog in September will reward you with these sunset views of Bog Asphadel. So I'd be remiss if I didn't include American Cranberry in the lineup of must-see plants, with its crane-shaped flowers blooming mid-June to mid-July. After all, it is the progenitor of our commercially grown cranberries. The berry contains air sacs to keep it buoyant in the bog, and not known to be a favorite of wildlife, its seeds are dispersed by water. It adds color to a bog's winter landscape. Other June blooming wetland favorite shrubs include high bush blueberry and Inkberry holly. Inkberry holly has small yet beautiful white flowers that attract numerous pollinators. And those flowers turn into beautiful black berries that feed the birds, such as this beautiful Swainson's thrush. And swamp azalea, whose delicate flowers also provide nourishment to beneficial insects. And June is also the time to return to the dry, sandy barrens to see goat's rue. This tenacious perennial grows from a combination of taproot and stout fibrous root into a 1 to 2 foot multi-branched flowering herb. Leaves are pinnately compound, meaning they are divided into many smaller leaflets resembling ferns. Really beautiful plant. Flowers are in clusters at the tips of the branches, and each flower has a conspicuous yellow upper petal as well as a pink or purple lower petal. And it can be purchased at native nurseries and is a really nice addition to a sandy soiled yard or garden. And because it is a legume, it fixes nitrogen in the soil. And July is the month for sundews, another type of carnivorous plant. I'm going to introduce you to New Jersey's 3 native species of sundews, all of which you can find while exploring the bogs of the pinelands, and all named for the shape of their leaves. The least common of the 3 is round-leaved sundew. And each of the petals are its leaves. The tip of each leaf is rounded. And that's what distinguishes it from spatulate-leaved sundew that has a more spatula shape, or a better description would be a spoon-shaped leaf tip. The round-leaved sundews grow more prostrate, low to the ground and flat. And the spatulate-leaved sundews have more of an upright appearance, with their leaves extending from a center stalk, growing longer than they are wide, accentuating the narrow tip. And here's a colony of both round-leaved sundews and spatulate-leaved sundews growing on a stump in Oyster Creek in Waretown. And I found these while canoeing Wells Mills Lake at Wells Mills County Park. And I found this to be a really interesting mix of the 2 species, because the literature states that round-leaved sundews tend to prefer shade and spatulate-leaved sundews prefer open sun. And each leaf of both species is covered with hair-like structures or tentacles, tipped with reddish glands that secrete a fragrant, sticky substance called mucilage, luring and trapping visiting insects. The tentacles bend over the victim, pushing it towards the petal of the leaf, where there are more digestive glands. And enzymes exuded from the plant mix with a weak acid found in the sticky mucilage and digest the trapped insect in about 24 to 48 hours. The plant absorbs the nutrients. Flowers of both species are white. Pictured here are the flowers of round-leaved sundew. And depending on many factors, including the time of year, amount of precipitation, beaver activity upstream, bogs might be very, very dry or very, very wet. And here you can see that the bog has dried up. And thread-leaved sundew is showcasing its tenacity and hardiness, traits required of all plants that live in barrens and bogs. Thread-leaved sundew has very long, thread-like leaves that grow from the base of the plant, a basal stem, and unfurl as they grow, much like a fern's fiddlehead. The thread-leaved sundew also has mucilaginous glands dotting the tips of tentacles covering each leaf. And this plant in the photo also has 2 flowers unfurling in the center of that left plant. And the flower stem, called a peduncle, lacks the tentacles and glands. The delicate buds are protected in the center of the furl. And threadleaf is the earliest blooming of the 3 sundews. Plants can begin blooming at the end of June into July and even late August. The flower has 5 petals in a lovely shade of pink or white, contrasting with bright yellow anthers. I think this is a really pretty picture of that flower. And flower buds line each flower stalk, one on top of the other. The lowest bud opens first. It opens in the morning, and it only remains open until about noon. It blooms only 1 or 2 days, and then the next bud up blooms for half a day for 1 or 2 days, and then it's the turn of the one above, and so on, each bud taking its turn one at a time. And once the last flower blooms, the stalk is completely unfurled. And here is another magnificent flower. It has earned its name, Meadow Beauty. It lives in bogs and grows from 1 to 2 feet tall. And each of the 4 pinkish purple flower petals have a slightly lopsided shape. The filaments are yellow and the pollen-bearing anthers are bright yellow. They're curved and attached to the filament at right angles. And here the white pistil, consisting of the style and the stigma, is stretched out beyond the stamen. After fertilization, the petals fall off and the stamen curl up and turn orange. The identity of the flower is hardly recognizable at this point. The vase-shaped fruit looks like a completely different flower. It is a beauty in all stages of its life cycle. So August brings us to the end of summer, and I'll share 3 more favorite plants. So it's true, we have asters in our gardens at home, but whenever I see a garden flower, quote unquote garden flower, blooming out in the wild, being wild, blooming for its own sake and not just for me, I feel a deeper level of appreciation for its beauty and for its ability to survive and thrive, untethered to my human desire for controlling nature. The slender, delicate, blush blue petals of bog aster are quite special. They bloom mid-August to late September. And these flowers were enjoyed at White's Bog Village, growing on the edges of the cranberry bogs. Everything about Marsh St. John's wort is stunning. The buds are a brilliant peachy orange color. The tops of the leaves are a soft green with a purplish tinge, and an even softer green with a silvery tinge underneath. The stem and the veins of the leaves are pink. As the buds mature, they turn different shades of orange, pink, and purple. 2 leaves grow opposite one another and are attached directly to the stem with no petiole. Botanists call these sessile leaves. Each pair of leaves face in a north-south or east-west direction, opposite the pair directly below. And the flowers bloom. The flowers in bloom are a sight to behold. They bloom in shades of purple and pink and peachy orange. And although I'm intrigued by the carnivorous habits of sundews and bladderworts and provoked by the deceptive beauty of pink lady slipper, I am absolutely enamored by the sheer elegance of this perfect flower. But I have one last plant to share with you today, and it is a plant that lures botanists to the pinelands from all over the world, and this is called curly grass fern. It is not a flowering plant. Instead, it is a fern, which reproduces by spores, but hardly looks like a fern, right? According to Whitmer Stone, an American botanist living in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, This plant was first discovered in the early 1800s at Quaker Bridge in the Pine Barrens. And it attracted much interest worldwide then and continues to draw interest now. In New Jersey, it is considered a rare plant, and it is endangered in New York and Delaware. The low-growing curly blades are vegetative infertile fronds. They are very tiny and very unfern-like, and they look like tiny evergreen blades of curly grass. And the taller upright blades are the fertile fronds, which give way to one-sided segmented fruiting bodies in July and August. And the fruiting bodies hold the spores. If the spore finds suitable conditions, it will grow into a tiny heart-shaped plantlet called a prothallus or gametophyte. And the gametophyte is the intermediate stage from spore to adult fern, and it contains the genetic material of the adult fern in the form of both sperm cells and egg cells. And if there is a proper amount of moisture in the immediate habitat, the sperm cells swim towards the egg cells, either on the same gametophyte or an adjacent one. And they fuse their genetic material to make a cell with the full adult fern set of genes. And this cell is the beginning of the adult fern. So ferns are a very ancient group of plants, older than land animals and far older than the dinosaurs. They were thriving on Earth for 200 million years before the flowering plants evolved. And there are so many more unique plants and wildflowers of barrens and bogs that I just don't have enough time to show you today, but hopefully you are now inspired to take a walk in your local woodlands, visit the Pine Barrens, visit our wetlands, come visit South Jersey and go exploring. You can join a guided walk. You can take a botanical field class offered by one of our many wonderful local conservation organizations, or just go outside yourself and enjoy the beauty of our natural world. So thank you so much for joining me today for this virtual walk through the Pine Barrens.
Thank you very much, Becky. I don't know how many people on here. We've got we had close to 90 people. Will share my experience of being very familiar with the highlands, but completely unfamiliar with the Pine Barrens. I had my first serious trip there just a little bit more than a year ago, and I was absolutely enthralled. So we do have quite a few questions. I just want to point that out because this is probably a highlands crowd. So somebody would like to know if you can recommend plants for clay soils.
So is this for gardening?
Yeah, I think a lot of these questions are going to be things like, a lot of them are going to be things like, can I grow this in my,
okay.
my garden?
Yeah, the plants that I talked about today, as you can probably tell, I kind of bounced back and forth from plants of the Pine Barrens, which is a very, very sandy soil condition, to plants of the bogs, which is very, very, the opposite, very wet, anaerobic mud, Manahawk and muck, we call it. And I did not highlight any plants that would grow in clay soils. Although some of these, I tried to mention ones that are appropriate for landscapes, such as Bearberry it's becoming a very popular ground cover, which is very exciting. A couple of these can be grown at home. Goat's rue is for sale. You can purchase seeds. I've seen plants for sale. Cranberry if you have the appropriate conditions, but not a lot of folks have bogs readily to plant in. Us, Southerners have very sandy soil, but a lot of these plants are rare And I certainly, know that nobody in the Native Plant Society would ever go harvest any of these plants out in the wild to bring them back to their own garden, because as I hopefully explained, they're probably not going to survive. They need those very special conditions. They have relationships with the soil biota, and to disturb that would mean, certain death for the plant and unhappiness for you and for, everyone who wants to enjoy the plants in the wild. So what I can offer you to answer that question, what grows in clay soils, part of my job with the Ocean County Soil Conservation District is to promote our Jersey Friendly Yards initiative. And so I'll just say, please contact me, education@soildistrict.org, and I can point you in the direction of our Jersey Friendly Yards programs. You can listen to those. You can Google the Ocean County Soil Conservation District YouTube page, where we have all our videos on Jersey Friendly Yards that I've done. And all the Jersey Friendly Yards webinars are on the jerseyyards.org website. And on that jerseyyards.org website is a plant database. And in that plant database, you can actually specify you want all the plants that only grow in clay soil, and you can find all those plants and designate, Piedmont or Ridge and Valley or Highlands. So probably not the answer you were hoping for, but
yeah,
the best.
Thank you. That's an excellent. It's an excellent database. It's a very, very useful. The whole website, the whole Jersey Friendly Yards website, is extremely useful.
Thank you.
Very specific question: do golden clubs emit the scent to attract the flies?
I don't think so. That is a good question. I can go look back at my notes. It's in the onion family. That is definitely one of my favorite plants. They're all my favorite plants. This one, because when the weather starts to break and we get to, March, and we're all just, I need to go outside and look at some plants. Those first few are, I'll say, favorite early spring plants. So I'm looking here at my notes. And it attracts the fly, pollinated by insects. I don't recall reading anything about a fragrance. That doesn't mean it doesn't have one. And I have with me, I won't thumb through it now, but I highly recommend this book. This is the one that I featured.
I put the name and author in the chat. If you scroll up to near the beginning of the chat, folks, you'll find that. Someone wonders why in some springs you see a lot of pink lady slippers and in others you don't.
That is a good question. I too have noticed that, and in the places where I know it grows, where I kind of seek it out each year, hopefully you kind of got the idea that I have my special places, and every year I go there and I see these different plants. And when there's prescribed burns, I notice there's an abundance of lady slipper in that area. Whereas other years, they're there, but they may not be as many. So my curiosity question is, what has happened to the landscape in that period of time between when I saw them last year and when I see them the next year? Prescribed burn, perhaps, that's one way to kind of disturb the soil, put more nutrients on the soil, kind of prepare it in a way that the plants are more viable, or the soil has more nutrients, or I don't know, honestly, the fire ecology of soil. I guess I should find out. But soil disturbance is probably has something to do with the answer to that question of why they exist some years and not other years.
Are the, is a similar question about the, well, not really similar. Do the star flowers like to grow in certain leaf litters? In other words, what trees do they tend to grow under? And I think of them as less specialized plants, because you do see them in upland areas. You see them,
Yes,
yeah. Is it
I too, I've
Mhm.
seen them in more wet areas as well as more dry areas.
Mhm,
So the book says pine oak. We are South Jersey, we are pine oak. Those are our two dominant species. So that makes sense. But I, like you said, I've seen them kind of walking on the edges of trails where there's not a lot of leaf litter, but
Mhm.
when I think about it, it's probably a lot of organic matter, decomposed organic matter along the edges of these trails that I'm walking. And then I've also seen them, I showed you the picture of like literally thousands of these plants growing together. And that was a pine oak forest.
Somebody was wondering
Lots
if
of-
that area was fenced.
No, actually, that's
Really?
a wildlife refuge in Brick, and deer have rain in that area. I was really surprised. I kind of stumbled on it and had to do a double take and then take pictures. It was amazing.
Hmm.
Really pretty plant. You have to keep an eye out for that one because it's so small, you'll walk right by it.
And it doesn't bloom for long, and the flower, and it's very delicate. Yeah, they almost look like they were coming out of nowhere because the stems are, they're so fine. Yeah, it's a wonderful plant. Someone's wondering if the pink colors of the grass pink and the rose begonia attract certain bees that other orchids don't.
Those are my three orchids I'm aware of. I'm not an orchid person. I know we do have orchid people in the Native Plant Society that could probably talk to you more about orchids. And I know there's orchid specialists out there because I myself have attended programs where orchid specialists actually talk. So I can't really answer that question, but I can tell you that they are gorgeous. Obviously, the lip attracts the pollinators and offers them a place to land. I've seen different types of pollinators, different sized bees. I do wonder if they all successfully pollinate and then fertilize different plants because some of them seem to kind of fumble around like it's not the one that they evolved with, the insect they evolved with, but the insect is being clever and sees a resource and is going for it.
Insects also perceive different colors than we do. So
Yeah.
we don't always know, when we look at a flower, we don't always know what they're seeing. What's important to the insect, which is why you have to worry about cultivars that change flowers at all, because the insects can no longer recognize them. We have, how can we find a walk through the pine barrens with a naturalist?
Oh, good question. Well, I'll say can I say when things calm down with COVID? Who knows if that statement will ever happen. Our chapter, the Jersey Shore chapter of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey, used to go out and do a lot more walks. We started doing garden tours this summer where people could gather outside. So we'll definitely keep that in mind to offer more tours when everybody's comfortable. Also, Ocean County Parks and Recreation and Burlington County Parks and Recreation, I'm aware they do as well, have a wonderful education program, both of those county systems. And Wells Mills County Park is one of the nature centers within the Ocean County Park system. And they do all kinds of, and I think they have started them back up again, they do all kinds of hikes. So you actually will be driven to these different spots. You'll be able to walk with the naturalist on the Batona Trail or even go up to North Jersey and way down south as well and enjoy a day out. They have wonderful, knowledgeable naturalists that take you on ecology van tours, and I do some birding van tours. And each year I used to, hopefully we'll start again, actually do a guided walk to Webb's Mill Bog, which
Somebody's
is one of
asking
the
about that
bogs
specifically.
I talked about.
Mhm.
That's the one that has a boardwalk that goes through it. It's actually managed by New Jersey DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. And we would actually go both there and to the Warren Grove. It's called the bombing range. The military has a whole, it's mostly owned by the military out there, but there's a lot of public space that you can walk around. So I would say Google, Ocean County Parks and Recreation System and find their newsletter, and then look through their newsletter for upcoming trips, guided walks to the Pine Barrens.
And also if you look at the Native Plant Society of New Jersey website under events, the different events of all the chapters are listed month by month. So that's another good source. Vicki has been putting many resources up into the chat. So if you want to scroll through for a minute or so, if you're looking for the Ocean County Parks and Recreation email is here. The Amazon link to the book that Becky mentioned, there's lots of good information in the chat, so I'll give you another minute or so. But I would say thank you very, very much, Becky. I just love this. I want to go down there in March, April, May, June, July, August, and see all these beautiful flowers. So
you're all inspiring me. So we'll I'll talk with my co-leaders for the Jersey Shore chapter, and we'll see, by June, like I said, June is kind of my favorite time. There's a lot of plants blooming at the bog, and see if we can put something together. So
that would be great.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So again, if it happens, guys, it will be on the website. And I see one new message, and do scroll through for that. And they're just thank you, and what a great talk it was. That's the new messages that are coming up now. And we do thank you very, very much.
It's my pleasure. Like you, Elaine, I love sharing information about my favorite plants and inspiring folks to go out and check them out for themselves. And, together we can all, appropriately conserve, special plants and the habitat that they need.
If we appreciate them, we'll conserve them. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, very, very much. And we're glad to see you. And we will see you next month, we hope, on February 7th, second Wednesday. And I guess that's good night. Thank you, Becky. That was great.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Becky.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.